The attribute of God that we're dealing with this week is the attribute of Tiferet, the attribute of splendor or truth. How a person, the same question that we have at the beginning of every chapter, should a person accustom himself or herself with the attribute of Tiferet, of splendor, of truth? If the word sounds familiar, we just read it in the Shemona Esrei, in the first paragraph after the Kedusha on Shabbos morning. We recite the words Yismach Moshe b'matnat chalko ki eved ne'eman karata lo, klil tiferet berosho natata, be'amdo lefanecha al har Sinai. Klil tiferet berosho natata, you adorned him with splendor on his head, because we're told in the Torah that when Moses comes down from Sinai, he is glowing, right, with rays. He's glowing with rays of light. Be'amdo lefanecha al har Sinai, when he stood before you on Mount Sinai. So we are used to this word, or this word jumped out at me this morning because I knew that I would be talking about it, that in context, this idea of splendor or something, let's say, grand, and he has to do with truth and wisdom and everything that the Torah would give a person. But we have to understand everything that's come before this chapter. Rabbi Cordovero didn't expect this to go on for months and months and months, Shabbos by Shabbos, broken up into a Netflix series. He expected you to binge this all at once, right? So we have to remember all of the previous chapters that we've studied in terms of wisdom and humility and Devorah, strength or heroism. So here, how does a person accustom themselves to Tiferet, to splendor, to truth, to this idea, this wonder? Without a doubt, I'm reading in the text, without a doubt the attribute of Tiferet is embodied in the toil of Torah. I just showed you the example that we read from our service in the Shemona Esrei involves Torah. Moses receives all of the Torah from God, and he is dressed in this splendor. He appears in the sense of Tiferet. However, great caution is needed to avoid becoming haughty through one's learning of Torah, so as not to cause great harm. So what could Moses have done when he was given the entirety of Torah? I bet you we don't think about this often enough. Moses is on top of Mount Sinai. The children of Israel have not proven to be, let's just say, supportive. The children of Israel have not proven to be, let's just say, loyal or even loyal to God, the idea. What could Moses have done on Mount Sinai when he received the entire Torah? He could have stayed. He was with God, with Torah. He could have just not come down the mountain. The inclination that he had received everything there was in the world, the inclination that he received everything else in the world could give a person bad ideas, right? Too much power, too much wisdom, too much splendor. It could cause harm. For just as one holds himself aloof, likewise he causes the attribute of Tiferet, which is Torah, to become aloof and withdrawn above, God forbid. I could sit and just, God forbid, say, when I study Torah, what is the point of going to meetings and opening with a small Devorah Torah that lasts 30 seconds or a minute long? It's only 30 seconds or a minute. Most people are just getting adjusted to the room. They're not even listening to the Devorah Torah. They're not listening. What is the point? Better I should just use that minute and study silently by myself. And I have to tell you that there have been rabbis through the generations who have felt this way, right? Who have felt like there's no reason to bring the wisdom of Torah to all Jews, the wisdom of all of Yiddishkeit to all Jews everywhere. Bring them just enough for what people could possibly understand, and that's enough, instead of pushing and giving more and trying to encourage more and more Jews to the light of Torah. However, everyone who humbles himself, and back in the text, or herself, in their Torah learning, causes Tiferet to descend and lower itself to influence Malchut, which is actually the people Israel, or the land of Israel. The actual realization of God's attributes is Malchut. So if a person can be humble enough in their study of Torah, then what they can do is they can inspire all of the Jewish people to actually come to a greater sense of Torah, to increase their learning themselves. Then we get into an idea here in chapter 7. We've gone far enough in the Sfirot that he starts to build what we imagine as the Sephirotic chart in our minds. And it begins here towards the end. And so I'll skip that part, and I'll skip to the third part on the bottom of page 63. Somebody said to me last week, I believe it was Dr. Melnick, that it starts to get racy. So I'm going to skip right to the racy part right now, all right? Because there's no reason to lose the community right here. Okay. So I'm starting at the bolded word third, shlishit. One who holds himself or herself aloof with his or her Torah knowledge over common folk, who are the nation of Hashem in general, causes Tiferet to hold itself aloof above Malchut and not influence it. So if rabbis study Torah and just keep it to themselves, then there is no flow from God to the Jewish people. And the entirety, the endeavor of Torah, the endeavor of all of the commentaries, of all of the Talmud, of all of Chassidus, of all of the writings that have occurred since Moses to now, is to influence, to bring a sense of godliness to God's chosen people. Rather, a person should consider himself or herself on par with all other people, and all civilized people should be highly esteemed before them, since they are down low, corresponding to the essence of Aretz, referring to the attributes of Malchut. So meaning to say, we live in this world. We live on the land. We're part of the people. And we actually don't or shouldn't raise ourselves up as a community because we study Torah often when we meet other people who don't study Torah often. Then it goes through a list of possible insults that one could call somebody. I'm going to skip through that part. Okay? And I'm going to go to the very end of that paragraph. Included in this conduct, does everybody see I'm on the last word, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down, the last word of the line is included. Included in this conduct is not being haughty toward those who are feeble-minded, who are in the category of the dust of the earth. Because anybody can glean some piece of Torah, so nobody should feel that they are beneath the idea of learning Torah. And nobody should feel like they are elevated above anybody, because anybody can actually bring insight into Torah. I forget it was this year or last year, my kids told me something that I'd never heard before, and I brought them up on the bima to recite it. It was right before Shavuot, and they said that the name Yisrael actually contains in it all of the names of the forefathers and foremothers, because each of the letters in the word Yisrael stands for one of the names of the forefathers and the foremothers, something I'd never heard before in my life, and you had never heard before until they brought it up, and I was in awe. I was in awe. For this reason, the earlier generations never held themselves aloof because of their Torah learning, as indicated in the incidents related in the Zohar, Parshat Bereshit, regarding Rav Hamnuna, who hid his true identity in order not to benefit from any honor because of his greatness in Torah. This is the most transgressed mitzvah of all, especially by rabbis. The commandment is to run from honor, right? To not accept honors. And if you've ever been to a dinner of any kind, if you need an honoree, you just call a rabbi in the community, and it's a lock that they want some kind of piece of glass to put on their mantle in their office. They also tend to sometimes give good speeches, but the idea to run from honors, to shun honor, is something that we see Rav Hamnuna do in the Zohar itself. So he actually doesn't even go by his own name. He doesn't introduce himself to people by his own name. Okay? And in the ancient regard, Rav Chagai, so now we're talking about another section of the Zohar from Shlach Lecha, who, when asked his name, simply answered, a Jew. People would come up and ask to introduce themselves, and he would introduce himself as a Stam Yid, just as a Jew, even though he was one of the greatest Torah minds in the Zohar. The Tikkunim, now this is what I spent the morning looking up. It's open to the page right here. The Tikkunim, Tikkun 26, in Tikkunei HaZohar, the last section of the Zohar, also tell of a venerable sage who fled when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai sought to kiss him, lest he take pride in his Torah learning. So, lest we understand this as a Me Too moment or some kind of nefarious act like that, I went and I looked at the story that's being told. So I actually can't find this actual moment in chapter 26 of Tikkunei HaZohar. But what I can find is two moments, one of Rabbi Eliezer and one of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And as they teach Torah to the Chevraya, to the group that they walk around with in the Zohar, this is one of the famous pages of the Zohar, and they teach the meaning of God's name, of the tetragram, of the 4 letters of God's name. And at the end of it, the students want to kiss them, for their mouths have spoken such, they want to kiss their heads because their heads have thought of such brilliant pieces of Torah. And at the end of this story, the students say, if we were only alive for this moment to hear this piece of Torah, this teaching, that was enough. So what's fascinating about the story is literally you can interpret the splendor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's head or Rabbi Eliezer's head, and you could mistake and say that they came up with these ideas, and because their mouth spoke it, you want to kiss the physical attribute from which this Torah was delivered to the earth. And that's a mistake, according to Rabbi Cordovero and according to his interpretation of the story. Why? Because their story delineates, their teaching delineates from a different source. You're mistaking it to say, this person on earth, this physical person of flesh and blood, is the deliverer of this beautiful message. When in fact, what you should be kissing, what you want to kiss, is the source of the message itself. The splendor, we could misunderstand the splendor as the rays coming from Moses' face. But when we look at Moses' face, what are the rays supposed to make us understand? The power of God's word. That's exactly right. It's not a reminder about how special Moses is, because he carries with him this kind of splendor. And it's not a reminder of how unbelievably brilliant Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is, because he's able to teach this piece of Torah. It's a reminder that godliness can be brought into the Jewish people like this. I have to tell you one story, and then we'll conclude our teaching. When we lived in Israel for the year, my kids went to a gan, which was an English-speaking gan, because many people told us that you spend 3-4 months transitioning into a Hebrew school, and the kids will hate it, and so better to put them into an English-speaking gan in Jerusalem, an English-speaking school, and that way they'll make friends very quickly because all the kids will speak English, and it's taught in English to Israeli kids, and they won't have to transition, and they'll pick up Hebrew just by osmosis. So I can tell you for a fact, nobody picks up any language by osmosis, and I can tell you that while this school might not have been good for their Hebrew education, it was, if not the best education experience that Blair and I had with the kids, it was phenomenal, and it was very good for their ego, because they walked into an English-speaking school where everybody was learning English, and they spoke English fluently and could read English. They were gaonim. They were geniuses in the minds of their classmates. Many of the policies of the school were the types of policies that one would hope be at a school and aren't. Not in American schools and Jewish day schools. They just don't exist here. So, for instance, the kids shoes were optional, shirts were optional. There were, you come back from recess, kids were hot, clothes came off, it wasn't a big deal. Simon, halfway through the day, every single day, began to miss Shelby. And so he spent half the day in his 2-year-old class and half the day in Shelby's 4-year-old class. And the teachers were fine. It was a 4-classroom schoolhouse that was literally a house. And the teachers were fine. He would just migrate looking for Shelby, and he would sit there. And he learned to read actually very, very quickly, sitting in the 4-year-old class instead of the 2-year-old class. And everybody was fond of everybody, never was friends with everybody. But when a child came up with a good comment, when the teacher would ask a question and the child came up with a good comment, the teacher would say, "Oi, brilliant, kiss that kepi." And the student would kiss their hand and they would touch their head because they came up with such a good idea. And we try to do that even in our house today. I have to tell you something, I do that. I say that to the religious school kids too. It's so smart, kiss your kepi, right? Because because the specialness of who we are, we have the ability to praise it's not the comment itself that's brilliant. The comment has a source. And I explain to the kids, the source of the comment comes from their kepis, and the ability in our kepis and our heads comes from God. And by understanding that we appreciate that process of delivering brilliance into the world, we appreciate it through love, through kisses. So while this story probably doesn't get taught as often, or today Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would probably be arrested, right, for all the kissing that went on in Tikkunei HaZohar, I can tell you that with his sensibility, he fostered a sense of Torah learning that, according to our tradition, has been essentially unparalleled. And he is remembered each Lag BaOmer for bringing light into the world, which is why Crazy Michiganers light things on fire on Lag BaOmer to remember the fire that he brought. The Zohar literally means sparks in Hebrew. The Zohar, the sparks into the world. And it brings it full circle because of the first Tiferet, the first splendor of Moses' face. He could have walked down the mountain and seen people cover their faces because they couldn't take looking directly at him. And he could have assumed that what happened on the mountaintop at Sinai was so special that he became special and he was above these people. But instead, he brought the Torah down to the Jewish people. Literally, he brought it down to where we were standing. And he spent the rest of his life trying to encourage us to be better. And before I was a rabbi, I had a tough time empathizing with Moses' challenge. And now that I am a rabbi, I can tell you that every complaint that the Jewish people have about him, every time I rub my face, I think to myself, he's even a greater tzaddik than people can possibly imagine. Because you have to think that what he was trying to do was the biggest task in the history of the Jewish people. There are scenes where he tries to tell people, this week, you're going to stand in, there will be a time where you're actually standing on the other side of the river in Israel, and God will give you a choice between all goodness and life and difficulty and death. And the Torah tells us this week, choose life. And it sounds like the simplest decision in the world. And all you have to do is pick up a newspaper, if you can find the newspaper today, or you can pick up a tablet and read the news, and you understand it's not so easy. The Torah tells us today, the man with splendor literally pouring out of his face, all the wisdom, says choose life. Tiferet, even for those of us who, God willing, one day might achieve it, Tiferet isn't something that belongs to us. It's just a representation of the service of God and Torah and the bringing of light into this world. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova.